I never thought I'd end up in a courtroom because of a snowstorm, but here I am, watching the judge sentence the woman who nearly destroyed my business and endangered an entire neighborhood. My name is Zachary Winters, and I own a small snow removal company in Rochester, Minnesota. For the past 8 years, I've been keeping driveways clear and roads passable during our brutal winters. It's honest work, physically demanding, but it pays the bills and keeps people safe. That's what matters to me. I've got 3 trucks, a crew of 5 guys who work their tails off, and contracts with about 40 residential properties scattered across town. Nothing fancy, but we've built a solid reputation. The trouble started in November when I landed a contract with the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association. It seemed like a dream job at first. 23 homes in an upscale development on the north side of town, all paying into one collective agreement. The HOA president, a woman named Patricia, seemed reasonable during our initial meeting. She showed me around the neighborhood, explained their expectations, and we agreed on a fair price. The contract was straightforward. I'd clear the main roads within the development whenever snowfall exceeded 2 inches, and I'd handle individual driveways for an additional fee per homeowner. What Patricia didn't mention during that tour was Brenda Vaughn. I met Brenda for the first time in early December, right after our first significant snowfall of the season. It was a Tuesday morning, around 5:30. The storm had dumped 7 inches overnight, and I was out with my crew making our rounds. We just finished the main loop through Maple Ridge and were starting on the side streets when I saw her. She was standing in the middle of Oakmont Drive, the main artery through the development, wearing a pink bathrobe and fuzzy slippers, waving her arms like she was directing air traffic. I pulled my truck to a stop about 20 feet away and rolled down the window. The cold air rushed in, carrying tiny snowflakes that had started falling again. "Can I help you, madam?" I called out. She marched toward my truck with the kind of purposeful stride that told me this wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation. She was maybe 55, with blonde hair that looked professionally colored and styled despite the early hour. Her face was pinched with irritation. "You certainly can help me," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You can explain to me why you thought it was acceptable to start your noisy machinery at this ungodly hour. Do you have any idea what time it is?" I glanced at my dashboard clock, though I knew exactly what time it was. "It's 5:30, madam. We start early so people can get to work." 5:30 is the middle of the night. I have a right to sleep peacefully in my own home without being woken by your ridiculous snow plows. I took a deep breath, reminding myself to stay professional. I understand it's early, but this is when snow removal happens. It needs to be done before people leave for work. It's in the contract with your HOA. I don't care what the contract says. I'm on the HOA board and I never approved starting before 7 in the morning. This is completely unacceptable. That should have been my first warning sign. I later learned that Brenda had actually voted against hiring my company in the first place, preferring instead to give the contract to her brother-in-law's operation out of St. Paul, despite their higher bid and questionable reviews. "Madam, I'd be happy to discuss this with Patricia and the rest of the board, but right now I need to finish clearing these roads before the morning commute. If you could please step aside." "I will not step aside. You'll wait until a reasonable hour, or you'll leave this neighborhood immediately." Behind me, I could see headlights approaching. My crew member Tommy was waiting in the second truck. We had a schedule to keep, and standing here arguing wasn't helping anyone. "I'm sorry, but I have a job to do. Please move to the sidewalk for your own safety." Her eyes narrowed. "Are you threatening me?" "No, madam. I'm asking you to get out of the road so I can clear it. It's for everyone's safety, including yours." She crossed her arms and planted her feet wider. "I'm not moving." I sat there for a moment, genuinely baffled. I'd dealt with difficult clients before, but no one had ever literally stood in the road to prevent me from working. I pulled out my phone and called Patricia. It went to voicemail. I tried the HOA's emergency number. Same result. Finally, I made a decision I probably should have thought through better. I put the truck in reverse, backed up, and took an alternate route through the neighborhood. It added 20 minutes to our schedule, but it avoided the confrontation. Brenda stood in the middle of Oakmont Drive, watching us go with a satisfied expression. That was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Brenda made it her personal mission to make my life miserable. She filed a formal complaint with the HOA about our operating hours, despite the fact that our contract explicitly stated we'd begin work as early as necessary to ensure safe passage by 7 in the morning. She sent me 17 emails in 1 week, each one detailing various grievances about our work. The snow was piled too high on one corner. We'd left tire tracks on someone's lawn, which was actually impossible given that the ground was frozen solid and covered in 8 inches of snow. We were driving too fast, too slow, making too much noise, not clearing enough snow, clearing too much snow. Patricia apologized profusely every time we spoke. "Brenda is just very particular," she'd say. "Try to accommodate her when you can, but do your job. We're happy with your work." I tried. I really did. But Brenda seemed determined to find fault with everything. She'd call me at 6 in the morning to complain about something she claimed happened the day before. She'd stand on her front porch and record videos of my crew working, narrating in this accusatory tone about how we were destroying the neighborhood's peace and property values. The real problem started in January. Minnesota winters are no joke, and January of that year was particularly brutal. We had 3 major storms in 2 weeks, each dumping anywhere from 6 to 14 inches of snow. I was running my crew around the clock, trying to keep up with all our contracts. We'd clear a street, and by the time we finished the last one, the first street needed to be cleared again. On January 15th, the forecast called for another big storm. 8 to 12 inches, starting around midnight and continuing through the next day. I called all my clients to confirm they wanted service, checked and rechecked my equipment, and had my crew on standby. The snow started right on schedule. By 3 in the morning, we already had 5 inches on the ground, and it was coming down heavy. I headed out with Tommy and Jake, one of my newer guys. We started with our commercial contracts, the parking lots and business access roads that absolutely had to be clear by opening time, then moved to residential areas. We hit Maple Ridge around 5:15. The development looked like a winter postcard, all the houses with their warm lights glowing against the white landscape. Beautiful, but treacherous. The roads were buried under at least 8 inches already, with more accumulating fast. I took the lead, starting on the main entrance road and working my way through the planned route. We'd done this same pattern a dozen times by now. It was efficient, covered all the roads in logical order, and ensured that every house had at least one clear route to the main street. We were about halfway through when I saw them. Orange traffic cones. Someone had placed a line of traffic cones across Oakmont Drive, right at the intersection with Birchwood Lane. This was a critical junction in my route. Normally, I'd plow down Oakmont, which ran east-west through the center of the development, and use it to access 4 different side streets. With this intersection blocked, I'd have to backtrack and take a much longer route that would add at least 30 minutes to our work. I stopped the truck and climbed out. The snow was still falling heavily and the wind had picked up, creating drifts that reached halfway up the cones. I grabbed the first cone to move it. "Don't you dare touch those." I turned to see Brenda storming down her driveway. She lived in the house right on the corner, I realized. A big colonial-style place with a 3-car garage and elaborate landscaping that was currently buried in snow. "These cones are in the middle of the road," I said, stating the obvious. "I need to clear this intersection." "These cones are here for a reason. This intersection is closed." "Closed? This is a residential street. You can't just close an intersection." She pulled her phone out of her coat pocket and held it up, showing me a photo of what appeared to be a crack in the pavement. "There's damage to the road surface right here. I've documented it and reported it to the HOA. Until it's inspected and repaired, this section is closed to heavy vehicles. That includes your snow plow." I looked at the snow-covered ground. "You're telling me there's a crack under 8 inches of snow that's so dangerous I can't drive over it?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you. And if you damage it further, the HOA will hold you personally liable for the repairs." "That's not how this works. I have a contract to clear these roads." "You have a contract to provide services in a safe and professional manner. Damaging HOA property is neither safe nor professional." I pulled out my phone and called Patricia again. This time, thankfully, she answered. "Patricia, it's Zachary. I'm here in the neighborhood, and Brenda has blocked off the Oakmont-Birchwood intersection with traffic cones. She says there's road damage, but I need access to do my job." I heard Patricia sigh heavily on the other end. "Let me call her. Give me 5 minutes." I stood there in the falling snow, watching Brenda watch me. She had this triumphant expression, like she just won some important victory. My phone rang 4 minutes later. "Zachary, I talked to Brenda. She insists the road surface is damaged. I haven't seen any reports about it, but she says she submitted a formal complaint last week. Look, can you work around it for now? I'll have someone inspect it later today." Working around it adds significant time to my route. I've got other clients waiting. "I understand, and I'm sorry. But if there really is damage and you make it worse, it becomes a huge problem. Just for today, use the alternate route. We'll get this sorted out." I wanted to argue, but what was the point? "Fine, but this needs to be resolved before the next snow." "It will be, I promise." I moved my trucks and took the long way around. It added 40 minutes to our Maple Ridge route, which meant we were late to our next neighborhood. Mrs. Chen, one of my regular clients over on the east side, called to ask where we were. I had to explain the delay, apologize, and promise we'd get there as soon as possible. She was understanding, but I could hear the worry in her voice. She was elderly and needed her driveway clear for a doctor's appointment. We finished Maple Ridge and raced to catch up on the rest of our schedule. By the time we were done, it was nearly 2 in the afternoon, and I'd had to call 3 clients to reschedule their service for later that evening. My crew was exhausted, my trucks were running low on fuel, and I was 4 hours behind schedule. The next morning, I drove back to Maple Ridge to check on the intersection. The cones were gone. The road looked perfectly fine, just like every other stretch of pavement in the development. I took photos, documenting the complete lack of any visible damage. I sent an email to Patricia with the photos attached. "Can you please confirm if the road inspection revealed any damage? I don't see any issues, and I need to know if this intersection will be accessible during future service calls." Her response came an hour later. "The inspector found no significant damage, just normal wear consistent with the age of the road. You're cleared to use the full route going forward. Again, I apologize for the confusion. I should have known it wouldn't be that simple. The next storm hit on January 22nd. Another overnight dumping, this time closer to 10 inches. Same routine. Out before dawn, start with commercial contracts, work our way through residential. We rolled into Maple Ridge at 5:30, and there, at the same intersection, was a vehicle. Brenda's silver Lexus SUV, parked diagonally across Oakmont Drive, completely blocking the road. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I pulled up behind the SUV and sat there for a moment, trying to process this escalation. Then I got out and walked up to the driver's side window. Brenda was sitting in the driver's seat, wearing what looked like a full winter outfit, complete with a puffy jacket and gloves. The engine was running. She rolled down the window. "Good morning, Zachary." "Brenda, your car is blocking the road. I'm aware. I need you to move it so I can clear the snow." "I don't think so. I've received multiple complaints from neighbors about your snow removal damaging the road surface and disturbing the peace at unreasonable hours. Until the HOA board can hold a formal meeting to address these concerns, I'm exercising my authority as a board member to suspend your access to this section of the neighborhood." "You can't do that. That's not how any of this works. I just did it. If you have a problem with my decision, you can file a complaint with the HOA. Brenda, there are people in this neighborhood who need to get to work. There's a nurse who lives on Birchwood who has to be at the hospital by 7. There's a guy on Elmwood who drives a school bus. If this road isn't clear, they can't get out. Perhaps they should have considered that before supporting a snow removal contract that disrupts the entire neighborhood at inappropriate hours." I pulled out my phone and called Patricia. Voicemail. I tried the other board members whose numbers I had. No answer from anyone. "Patricia isn't available," Brenda said sweetly. "She's out of town for a family emergency. Won't be back until next week. I'm the acting HOA president in her absence." That's when I realized this had been planned. She'd waited until Patricia was gone to pull this stunt. "Brenda, I'm asking you one more time to move your vehicle. People are relying on these roads being clear. And I'm telling you one more time that I'm not moving. If you attempt to push my vehicle with your plow, I'll have you arrested for destruction of property and assault." I stood there in the falling snow, weighing my options. I could call the police, but what would I say? There was a car parked on a private road. The HOA maintained these streets, not the city. Unless I could prove she was breaking some law, the cops probably wouldn't do anything. I made another decision I probably should have thought through better. I backed up my truck, found another route through the neighborhood, and completed the work. It took an extra hour, and I was late to my next job again. This became Brenda's new tactic. Every single time it snowed enough to trigger our contract, she'd park her Lexus across Oakmont Drive. Sometimes she'd sit in the car. Sometimes she'd leave it there and go back inside. But the result was always the same. I had to take the long route, my schedule got thrown off, and my other clients suffered. I documented everything. I took photos every time, time-stamped and geotagged. I sent emails to every board member I could reach. I even showed up at the HOA office during business hours, but was told that only residents could request meetings. The real kicker came in early February. I sent out my monthly invoices, including the one to Maple Ridge HOA. It included additional charges for the extra time required due to route obstructions. Brenda called me personally. "We're not paying these additional charges. Those charges are for documented extra time required because of vehicle obstruction." There was no obstruction. I was simply parking on a public road. That road is maintained by the HOA, and you were deliberately blocking access. Prove it. And even if I was parking there, which I'm not admitting, you had alternate routes available. You can't charge us extra because you chose to take a longer route. I chose it because you blocked the normal route. I'll see you in arbitration if you pursue this. In fact, I've been reviewing your contract, and I think we have grounds to terminate for failure to provide services as specified. You've been consistently late and have failed to maintain the quality standards we expect. She was twisting everything. Every delay she'd caused, every problem she'd created, she was now using as evidence that I wasn't doing my job properly. I consulted with a lawyer friend. He reviewed my contract and documentation and gave me the bad news. You can fight this, but it's going to cost more in legal fees than the contract is worth, and these HOA disputes can drag on forever. Even if you win, you'll probably lose money. So what do I do? Finish out the contract period, don't renew, and chalk it up to experience. Some clients aren't worth the headache. That would have been the smart play. But I'm stubborn and I was angry. This woman was deliberately sabotaging my business, costing me money and making my crew's lives harder. And she was doing it just because she could, because she enjoyed the power trip. The next storm was forecast for February 9th. A big one, potentially 12 to 16 inches. I made a plan. I called the Rochester Police Department's non-emergency line and explained the situation to the dispatcher. I have a commercial snow removal contract with a neighborhood. One of the residents has been repeatedly parking her vehicle in the middle of the road to block my work. Is there anything that can be done about this? The dispatcher put me through to an officer who listened to my story. Is this on a public road or a private road? It's maintained by the HOA, so I guess private. Then it's a civil matter. We can't do anything unless she's breaking a specific law. What if she's blocking access for emergency vehicles? Is she blocking the only way in or out of the neighborhood? No, but she's blocking the most direct route and creating a situation where roads aren't being properly cleared. Sir, I understand your frustration, but we can't compel someone to move their vehicle from a private road unless there's an immediate safety emergency. You'd need to resolve this through the HOA or civil court. I thanked him and hung up, feeling defeated. Then I had another idea. I called the Minnesota Department of Transportation and asked to speak to someone about road obstruction laws. After being transferred 3 times, I ended up talking to a supervisor named Gerald, who actually seemed interested in my problem. So she's parking in the middle of the road to prevent snow removal, he asked. That's correct. And this road connects to public streets on both ends. I thought about it. Oakmont Drive ran from the neighborhood entrance, which connected to County Road 14, a public road, straight through to the back of the development, where it met up with another public road, Highway 52. Yes, it connects 2 public roads. Then that's not a private road. That's a public road maintained under a special agreement with the HOA. I see this sometimes in developments. The HOA handles day-to-day maintenance, but the road itself is still legally public right-of-way. So, what does that mean? It means that intentionally obstructing that road could be a violation of Minnesota Statute 609.74, obstructing public roads. If she's deliberately parking in a way that blocks traffic and prevents necessary maintenance, that's potentially a misdemeanor offense. Can you send me that statute? I'll email you the relevant sections, and I'd suggest calling the police the next time it happens. If that road is legally public, they have jurisdiction. The email arrived 10 minutes later. I read through the statute carefully. It was pretty clear. Intentionally obstructing a public road or right-of-way was a misdemeanor punishable by up to 90 days in jail and a fine up to $1,000. The storm started right on schedule. I headed out with my crew at 3 in the morning. By the time we got to Maple Ridge at 5:45, there was already 13 inches on the ground and more coming down, and there, like clockwork, was Brenda's silver Lexus, parked diagonally across Oakmont Drive. This time I was ready. I pulled out my phone and called 911. 911, what's your emergency? I need to report a vehicle obstructing a public road. The driver is intentionally blocking the road to prevent snow removal, and it's creating a hazardous situation. What's your location? I gave the address. Oakmont Drive at Birchwood Lane in the Maple Ridge development. Are there any injuries? No, but there are residents who need to access this road for work, and emergency vehicles wouldn't be able to get through efficiently if needed. I'll send an officer. Please stay on the scene. I parked my truck and waited. Tommy and Jake pulled up behind me in the other trucks. "Boss, what's going on?" Tommy asked through the radio. "We're waiting for the police. This ends today." 20 minutes later, a Rochester PD squad car pulled up. A young officer, maybe late 20s, got out and walked over to my truck. I rolled down the window. "You called about an obstruction?" he asked. "Yes, sir. That Lexus is intentionally blocking this road. The driver has been doing this repeatedly to prevent me from clearing snow." He looked at the vehicle, then back at me. "This is a private neighborhood road, right?" "Actually, no. I checked with MNDOT. This road connects two public highways, so it's public right-of-way, even though the HOA maintains it." I showed him the email from Gerald on my phone. He read it carefully. "Okay, wait here." He walked over to the Lexus. I could see Brenda sitting in the driver's seat. She rolled down her window. They talked for a couple of minutes. I saw Brenda shaking her head, gesturing toward me and my truck. The officer's body language remained calm but firm. Then he walked back to my truck. "She says she's parked legally on a neighborhood street. She's parked in the middle of the road, blocking access. She claims this is a parking area. There's no parking allowed on this street. And even if there was, you can't park in a way that blocks the entire road." The officer looked back at the Lexus, then at the surrounding area. The snow was still falling heavily. Even in the limited visibility, it was obvious the vehicle was positioned to block as much of the road as possible. "Let me make a call," he said. He went back to his squad car and spent about 5 minutes on the radio. When he came back, his demeanor had changed slightly. More official. "My sergeant agrees this appears to be intentional obstruction of a public road. I'm going to ask her one more time to move the vehicle. If she refuses, I'll have to cite her." "Thank you, officer." He walked back to the Lexus. This conversation was longer and more animated. I saw Brenda pointing at me, then at the houses around us. She was clearly angry. The officer remained patient but kept shaking his head. Finally, he stepped back from the vehicle and pulled out his citation book. That's when Brenda got out of the Lexus. "This is harassment," she shouted, loud enough for me to hear from 50 feet away. "I'm being targeted because I dared to stand up to a contractor who's destroying our neighborhood." "Madam, I need you to calm down," the officer said. "I will not calm down. I know my rights. I'm parked on an HOA-maintained road, which makes this a civil matter, not a criminal one." "Madam, this road connects two public highways, which makes it public right-of-way. You're obstructing that right-of-way." "I'm doing no such thing. I'm simply parking my vehicle." "You're parked diagonally across both lanes in a way that prevents other vehicles from passing. That's obstruction." "This is because he called you, isn't it?" She pointed at me. "He's been harassing me for months. He drives through here at all hours of the night with his loud trucks, damaging our roads, disturbing our peace. I'm the victim here." More lights were coming on in houses around us. Neighbors were starting to emerge, some in bathrobes and coats, to see what the commotion was about. "Madam, I'm issuing you a citation for obstruction of a public road under Minnesota Statute 609.74. I need to see your driver's license and registration." "I refuse. This is illegal harassment." "Madam, if you refuse to provide identification, I'll have no choice but to place you under arrest." You wouldn't dare, but he did dare. When Brenda continued to refuse to provide her license, the officer radioed for backup. A second squad car arrived within minutes. Between the two officers, they explained to Brenda multiple times that she needed to comply. She refused each time, getting louder and more aggressive. Finally, one of the officers said, "Madam, turn around and put your hands behind your back. You're under arrest for obstruction and failure to identify. This is assault, police brutality. Everyone is seeing this," Brenda shouted to the growing crowd of neighbors. They handcuffed her gently and professionally, despite her continued protests. One officer led her to the squad car while the other approached me. "You have the keys to move the vehicle?" he asked. "No, sir. We'll have to get it towed. Can you work around it for now?" "Yes, I can take an alternate route." "Good. We'll have a tow truck here within the hour." "You'll need to come down to the station later to give a formal statement." "I'll be there this afternoon." They drove away with Brenda still shouting from the back seat. The neighbors stood around in the snow, talking among themselves. A few of them approached me. "I'm so sorry," one man said. "She's been out of control lately. We tried to vote her off the board, but she has allies." "Is it true she's been blocking your route?" a woman asked. "Every storm for the past month. That's insane. We need these roads clear." I spent the next hour clearing the neighborhood, working around the Lexus until a tow truck arrived to remove it. By the time we finished, it was almost 9 in the morning, but for the first time in weeks, I'd been able to complete my route properly. That afternoon, I went to the police station and gave my statement. I provided all my documentation, photos, timestamps, emails, the works. The officer taking my statement was thorough, asking detailed questions about each incident. "This is a pretty clear case," he said. "Especially with all this documentation. The prosecutor will probably offer her a plea deal, but there's definitely enough here for charges. What happens now? She'll be arraigned, probably later today or tomorrow. The charges are misdemeanor obstruction of a public road and resisting arrest. If convicted, she could face fines, possible jail time, and probation. What about her driver's license? That's up to the DMV, but with a conviction for intentional road obstruction, they might suspend her license. It depends on her driving record and the specifics of the case." I left the station feeling vindicated but also exhausted. This whole situation had spiraled way beyond anything I'd imagined when I first signed that contract. The next few days were chaos. The story spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. I got calls from board members apologizing, from neighbors thanking me, and from 2 local news stations asking for interviews. I declined the interviews. This wasn't about publicity, I just wanted to do my job. Patricia called me from out of town. "Zachary, I am so sorry. I had no idea things had gotten this bad. I knew Brenda was being difficult, but I never imagined she'd break the law. It's not your fault, Patricia. Actually, it is. I should have dealt with this more firmly from the start. The board is meeting via conference call tonight to discuss removing Brenda from her position. We can't have board members getting arrested. I appreciate that. And we're going to add a clause to your contract guaranteeing full access to all roads and specifying penalties if anyone interferes with your work." The news got more interesting a week later. I received a call from the prosecutor's office asking if I'd be willing to testify at Brenda's trial. She'd refused the plea deal. "What was the deal?" I asked. "Plead guilty to obstruction, pay a fine, attend anger management classes, and accept a 6-month license suspension." She turned it down, says she's not guilty and wants to fight the charges. "Then yes, I'll testify." The trial was scheduled for March 10th. In the meantime, life in Maple Ridge returned to something resembling normal. We had 3 more significant snowfalls in February, and each time I was able to complete my route without obstruction. Brenda's house sat quiet. I learned through the neighborhood grapevine that she was staying with her sister in St. Paul while awaiting trial. March 10th arrived cold and clear. I wore my best suit, which felt strange after spending most of my time in work clothes and snow gear. The courthouse in downtown Rochester was imposing, all stone and glass, with security checkpoints and formal procedures. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. The prosecutor, a sharp woman in her 40s named Jennifer Harris, met with me beforehand to review my testimony. "Keep your answers clear and factual," she advised. "Don't editorialize or let the defense attorney get you flustered. Just tell the truth about what happened. Got it?" Brenda was already seated at the defense table when I entered the courtroom. She glared at me with such intensity I could feel it from across the room. Her lawyer, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit, whispered something to her, and she looked away. The judge, an older man named Judge Morrison, called the court to order. The prosecutor laid out the charges and gave her opening statement, explaining how Brenda had repeatedly and intentionally obstructed a public road to interfere with contracted snow removal services. The defense attorney's opening statement painted a very different picture. According to him, Brenda was a concerned homeowner trying to protect her neighborhood from an aggressive contractor who worked at unreasonable hours and damaged property. Her vehicle placement was simply parking on a neighborhood street, not obstruction. I was called to testify. I placed my hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and took the stand. The prosecutor walked me through the timeline systematically. My contract with the HOA, the first encounters with Brenda, the traffic cones, the vehicle obstruction. Each incident was documented with photos and timestamps that were entered as evidence. "Mr. Winters, in your professional opinion, was there any legitimate reason for Miss Vaughn's vehicle to be parked in that location and manner?" the prosecutor asked. "No, madam. It was clearly positioned to block as much of the road as possible. There was no other explanation for parking diagonally across both lanes." "And what was the impact of this obstruction on your work?" "It added significant time to my route, made me late for other clients, and prevented me from efficiently clearing snow in a neighborhood where people depended on clear roads to get to work and access emergency services, if needed." The defense attorney's cross-examination was aggressive. He tried to suggest I was exaggerating the obstruction, that alternate routes were readily available, that I was simply trying to retaliate against a homeowner who had legitimate complaints about my work. "Isn't it true that you received multiple complaints about working too early?" he asked. "I received complaints from Miss Vaughn, not from other residents. But you did work at 5:30 in the morning, correct?" "Yes, that's standard for snow removal. It needs to be done before people leave for work." "And isn't it true that Miss Vaughn raised concerns about road damage?" "She made claims about road damage that were investigated and found to be without merit. But she did raise those concerns, and she had a right to do so, didn't she?" "She had a right to raise concerns. She didn't have a right to block public roads." He kept pushing, trying to make me seem unreasonable or aggressive, but I stuck to the facts. The photos and documentation spoke for themselves. The police officer who had arrested Brenda testified next. He described the scene: Brenda's refusal to move her vehicle, her refusal to provide identification, and her eventual arrest. He was professional and factual, his testimony backed up by body camera footage that was played for the court. Watching that footage was surreal. Seeing the scene from his perspective, hearing Brenda's escalating hostility, watching her refuse multiple lawful orders. It was even more damning than I remembered. Then Brenda took the stand. Her attorney guided her through what was clearly a rehearsed story. She was a concerned resident. I was a problematic contractor. She was simply parking on her street. She felt threatened by my presence and was exercising her right to use public roadways. The prosecutor's cross-examination was surgical. "Miss Vaughn, why did you park diagonally across both lanes?" I didn't think about it. "I just parked." "You just happened to park in a way that completely blocked the road. It's a wide vehicle." "Did you consider parking parallel to the curb, as is customary?" "I parked where I felt was appropriate." "And you felt it was appropriate to park in a way that blocked snow removal?" "I wasn't trying to block anything." The prosecutor pulled up one of my photos on a large screen. It showed the Lexus positioned clearly and deliberately across the road, with plenty of space on either side where it could have been parked without causing obstruction. "Miss Vaughn, can you explain how this parking position was accidental?" Brenda's face reddened. "I have a right to park on my street." "You have a right to park legally. You don't have a right to obstruct traffic. It's a neighborhood street. There wasn't any traffic. There was a commercial snow removal service attempting to perform contracted work. That's traffic, and you deliberately prevented them from passing." The testimony continued for another hour. The defense tried to salvage their case by calling a neighbor who testified that she'd been bothered by early morning snow removal noise. But on cross-examination, the prosecutor established that this neighbor was Brenda's close friend and had never actually filed a formal complaint. Closing arguments were straightforward. The prosecutor argued that the evidence clearly showed intentional, repeated obstruction of a public road. The defense argued that this was an overreach by law enforcement, targeting a homeowner for a civil dispute. Judge Morrison took a 15-minute recess to review the evidence, then returned with his verdict. "I've reviewed the testimony and physical evidence in this case," he said. "The evidence clearly shows that Miss Vaughn intentionally parked her vehicle in a manner designed to obstruct Oakmont Drive. Her claims that this was accidental or mere parking are not credible given the photographic evidence and the pattern of behavior over multiple weeks." He looked directly at Brenda. "Miss Vaughn, your actions went beyond mere nuisance. You deliberately interfered with a commercial service performing contracted work on a public road. You created potential safety hazards by preventing proper snow removal. And when confronted by law enforcement, you refused to comply with lawful orders. I find you guilty of obstruction of a public road under Minnesota Statute 609.74 and resisting arrest. I'm sentencing you to 90 days in jail, suspended, meaning you won't serve jail time if you comply with the following conditions: 12 months probation, 200 hours of community service, completion of an anger management course, and a fine of $1,000 plus court costs." Brenda started to stand, but her lawyer pulled her back down. "Additionally," the judge continued, "I'm recommending to the Minnesota Department of Motor Vehicles that your driver's license be suspended for 1 year. While that's ultimately their decision, given the nature of this offense involving intentional misuse of a vehicle on public roads, I believe suspension is appropriate." The gavel came down. Brenda sat frozen in her chair, her face pale. Her lawyer leaned over to talk to her, but she just stared straight ahead. I left the courtroom feeling a strange mix of relief and emptiness. I'd won, if you could call it that. Justice had been served, but it had taken months of stress, lost time, and legal proceedings to get here. Outside the courthouse, the prosecutor caught up with me. "Good testimony in there," she said. "Thank you. What happens now? She'll report to probation, complete her community service, and pay her fines. If she violates any terms of her probation, she'll serve the jail time. As for the license suspension, the DMV will make their decision within 30 days. Given the judge's recommendation and the nature of the offense, I'd say it's very likely they'll suspend. And if she drives without a license, that's a separate offense. If she's caught driving on a suspended license, especially given that it was suspended due to criminal conviction, she's looking at serious consequences. I thanked her and headed home. That evening, I got a call from Patricia. "I heard about the verdict," she said. "The whole board is relieved this is over. So am I. I want you to know, we formally removed Brenda from the board last week. She can't hold any HOA position for at least 3 years per our bylaws, and we've implemented new policies about board member conduct. That's good to hear. We'd like to extend your contract for another year if you're willing, with a bonus for all the trouble you went through." I thought about it. Part of me wanted nothing to do with Maple Ridge ever again, but it wasn't the neighborhood's fault. Most of the residents had been supportive. And I needed the work. "Let me see the new contract terms and I'll consider it." "Fair enough. I'll email them tomorrow." 3 weeks later, I received notice that the Minnesota DMV had suspended Brenda Vaughn's driver's license for 18 months. The suspension was based on the judge's recommendation and her conviction for using a vehicle to intentionally obstruct a public road. I didn't hear much about Brenda after that. The neighborhood grapevine reported that she'd sold her house in Maple Ridge and moved to Arizona to live with her daughter. Someone else said she was fighting the DMV suspension, but wasn't having any luck. I renewed my contract with Maple Ridge HOA, with improved terms that explicitly guaranteed access to all roads and imposed financial penalties on any resident who interfered with snow removal. Patricia and the new board were professional and responsive. We had a few more significant snowstorms that season, and each time my crew was able to work efficiently without obstruction. The following winter was even smoother. New residents had moved into Brenda's old house, a young couple with 2 kids who were just happy to have their driveway cleared regularly. The neighborhood felt different, more relaxed. People waved when I drove through. A few residents even brought coffee and donuts for my crew on particularly cold mornings. I never forgot the lesson, though. Sometimes the biggest obstacles in business aren't the work itself, or even the weather. Sometimes it's dealing with people who are so focused on control and being right that they'll break the law and destroy their own lives just to make a point. I also learned the importance of documentation. Those photos, timestamps, and emails had been crucial in court. Now I document everything with every client, not out of paranoia but out of professionalism. It protects both me and my clients when disputes arise. My business continued to grow. The following year, I added 2 more trucks and expanded into commercial properties. The reputation I'd built for being reliable and professional, even in difficult situations, led to more contracts. Other HOAs and property management companies reached out, having heard about how I'd handled the situation with Brenda. Sometimes people ask me if I regret having her arrested. The answer is no. I didn't set out to get anyone in trouble. I just wanted to do my job safely and efficiently. She made the choice to break the law repeatedly. She made the choice to escalate the situation. She made the choice to refuse the plea deal and fight charges she was clearly guilty of. Those were all her decisions. What I do regret is that it had to come to that point. If the HOA had dealt with her behavior more firmly early on, if there had been better systems in place for resolving disputes, maybe it never would have escalated to police involvement and criminal charges. That's why I always advise other contractors to address problems early, document everything, and don't be afraid to stand up for themselves within appropriate legal channels. The snow removal business continues. Every winter brings new challenges, new storms, new clients with their own quirks and demands. But I've never encountered another situation quite like Brenda Vaughn. Most people, even difficult ones, stop short of deliberately breaking the law. Most people, when confronted with official consequences, back down. But every once in a while, you encounter someone so convinced of their own righteousness, so focused on winning whatever battle they've created in their own mind, that they'll drive right off the cliff while insisting they're flying. I think about that sometimes when I'm out at 5 in the morning, plowing snow in the quiet darkness before the city wakes up. About the difference between standing up for what's right and just being stubborn. About knowing when to compromise and when to hold your ground. About the responsibility that comes with power, even the small amount of power you get from being on an HOA board. Mostly, though, I just focus on the work, keeping the routes clear, making sure my clients can get to work safely. Providing a service that matters, especially during the brutal Minnesota winters when just getting out of your driveway can be a challenge. And when I drive through Maple Ridge now, past the house where Brenda used to live, I don't feel anger or triumph. Just a kind of quiet satisfaction that the situation was resolved, that justice was served through proper legal channels, and that I can do my job without someone deliberately making it impossible. The roads are clear. That's what matters. That's what I fought for. And that's what I'll keep fighting for, one snowstorm at a time, for as long as I'm in this business.